We are in this series, Change Today, and New Year. We're still relatively early in this year. There's lots of change going on in our lives, and there's lots of change happening in everybody's life. It just does. Time continually changes. If you remember, excuse me, just a few months ago, we did a series called A New Season, and that talked about that kind of almost unplanned, necessary change in our life. Just like seasons, we don't really plan for them to happen. We know they're going to happen, but we don't really decide this is when it's going to start being warm, right? We wish we could say it's January and it's time to be warm again, but it doesn't happen that way. It more like God says, you know what, it's like June and we're finally going to get into the 80s. That's how it goes, and then it's 100 by August. That's kind of unplanned change, and we all have a lot of unplanned change in our life. A lot of those things got good and bad. I've been through a lot of change lately in my life. One of the smaller changes in my life I've had is just this last, was it Friday? What's today? The 18th? Yeah, Friday. I turned 24. My birthday was Friday. Not much to celebrate there. I know everyone's like, 24, whatever. Who cares, right? 24, yeah, that's exactly what I did. I woke up, I was like 24 years old. Thankfully I have a baby because there's like nothing to celebrate at 24 years old. All the fun ones are behind you. And like I was looking at, if you think the average lifespan of a male in the United States is 76 years old. And I looked at that and thought, I am a third of the way through my life already. Are you allowed to have third life crisis? A third life crisis? Like, can I like grow a beard and get a tattoo? That's why I have the motorcycle, because I'm just going to ride off after I leave. No, if I came home with a beard or a tattoo or a motorcycle, my wife would be like, yeah, you should go live with your parents again. But there's a lot of change. And then I've had some big changes, as you all know. We are celebrating the birth of our brand new son, Caleb. Caleb is 12 days old today. And the church just got a little bit bigger, I mean, that's the biggest growth. We've had a lot of growth in our church. But one of the biggest points of growth in our church has literally just been kids. Just kids. And I mean, we have some home sick today, but kids. I mean, this time last year, I was filling out this little report I have to do for GB, for General Baptist, our denomination, and it was telling us how many kids are we running on average. And I put down the number, I think with all the kids we have in that age group of like toddlers up through 5th grade, I think I put down maybe like we had an average of 10 kids. Okay, an average of 10 kids, which still doesn't seem like a whole lot, but last year I put down 3. And like literally after I put down 3, like we had one go to his dad's and another one stopped coming and it was 1. And so we had like, this time last year we had 1 kid and now we have 10 kids. I mean, that's a pretty big change. That's a pretty big growth. That's a cool thing. And in my life having Caleb, as you parents know, your first child changes everything. It changes when you sleep. It changes when you eat. It changes when you get up. It changes when you go to bed. And it changes when you get to play video games, when you get to watch TV, when you get to snuggle with your wife. It changes all that. Kids change an awful lot. It's a part of it. But change, honestly, is a good thing. Last night, I was at my wit's end. That kid, I'll be honest, he just would not shut up. He would not shut up. And he's eating like every 10 stinking minutes. And Mom's just like, I can't keep up. And I'm like, I can't keep up with either one of you. And it's just like, oh my gosh. And Mom's been having some health issues from the pregnancy and high blood pressure and stomach issues. And it's just like, and I just had this point. I was like at a boiling point last night. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this right now. But I remember calming down and looking at my son and being like, man, I love this. I love this change. This is such a good change in my life. And what I've realized, and Shanda even said this, she's like, this kid was born and like your responsibility rate went up by like 100, I mean, because like I've never driven so safely in my life. Like I see cars that see me on the road and going, this guy's going to cross the line. They're like, holy crap, that's the first time he's ever crossed the line on me. Because you actually like pay attention when you're driving, It changes everything. It's good change. It's big change. Change is something that is needed in our life. There is a man in the Bible by the name of Paul, and we're going to touch on Paul just really quick, and then we're going to move on to the core of our message today. But Paul was a man who went through some pretty heavy changes in his life. And I'm not going to sit on it for long, but just kind of to give you a quick explanation of Paul. Paul was a man who was what's called a Pharisee, which meant that he was a leader in the Jewish community. And he was excuse me, he was kind of like one of the big wigs, okay? He was one of the big guys on campus. He was the one who knew the law. He helped enforce the rules, all that stuff. Paul wasn't a big fan of Jesus. There's some stories in the Bible where Jesus faces the Pharisees and these leaders try to disprove him or try to catch him in the act or try to find a reason to imprison him. And it's believed, even though his name is not mentioned there, it's believed because it was the leaders that Paul was there for all of this. So he was like there in the corner stewing over all this stuff that he didn't like because this guy was coming in and changing everything for his people. See, Jesus came and he said, I did not come to do away with the law. I came to fulfill the law. In other words, I'm going to take what you have and I'm going to make changes to it to line more up with what God wants. And he didn't like that. So Jesus comes, he dies, he's resurrected, he goes back to heaven. His people go out, the disciples go out, begin to make disciples, they begin to spread across all nations to the ends of the earth. Somewhere along the lines there's this guy named Paul in the middle of it, and Paul gets awful angry. Paul, though, was kind of a coward. So Paul used his power to get other people to do his dirty work. And it's also believed that Paul was there when a man named Stephen, and Stephen would become what we call the first martyr of the church. And what it means to be a martyr means that you were sacrificed for the church, basically. You were killed, you were tortured, you were imprisoned. Not just your daily conviction, not this, okay, in the United States we have a lot of, Christians are convicted. We are persecuted, not convicted. We are. I have been called ignorant so many times in my life, it's not even funny. I've been called ignorant by people, it's like, I'm not bragging about my IQ, but it's like, your IQ is like 40 and you're calling me ignorant, okay? But it's there. There's persecution. But what we experience in the United States of being called ignorant, to be called, old-fashioned, being called hatred, saying that we have hatred and hypocrisy, all that stuff that they call us here in the United States. Okay, that is not being martyred. Being martyred is when you're like, you hear those stories in other countries where people are getting killed for their faith. That's a martyr. So Stephen would become the first martyr, and it's believed that Paul was the guy who initiated his death. And it wasn't like he was tried and found guilty of a crime. They attacked him on the streets. He was on his knees, looking to heaven, talking to God, when they threw rocks at him until he died. And it's believed that Paul is the guy who did that. So then one day, Paul is going down the road to Damascus, and he's on his way, and he's going to kill Christians. That's where he is going. He is going to persecute God's people, to kill Christians, because he believes that they are a threat to his lifestyle, and he does not want to change. While he's there, this blinding light comes. This light so bright that it literally physically blinds him. Have you heard about people who will have those traumatic events in their life? It will literally blind him. He was literally blinded, and this voice said, Paul, Paul, why do you persecute me? And Paul said, who are you, Lord? And the voice said, I am Jesus Christ. And he sent him on his way. He took him to a guy who God had spoke to. While he was there, he prayed for a long time. He was healed, and instantly Paul went out, changed. He saw the change that God needed him to make, and he went out and began preaching the gospel. In fact, on his first day as a Christian, Paul went out and started preaching about Jesus and was almost killed. Isn't that a little crazy? Being a killer, he almost ends up killed his first day as a Christian. Has to escape in a basket. They use to drop things over the edge of the walls of the city. So Paul goes on to become a major player in God's army. In fact, a large chunk of the Bible, of the New Testament, is written by Paul. Okay? And so we get to this point where Paul has planted these churches, he's raised up these leaders, he's doing this amazing stuff for God, he's still dealing with his demons, he's still dealing with the change he needs to make, he's still fighting the bad feelings and all this stuff, but he's following after God's heart. People are being saved, churches are being planted, but somewhere along the way, enough of the enemies, people who were like the way he was before, believe it or not, say, we don't like the change that's happened to Paul, we want to stop this. And They try and they try and they try to get him in prison. He ends up in prison a few times. He gets out. Then all of a sudden he ends up in prison for one more time. And he's in prison. By this point, Paul has been through a shipwreck. He has had his life threatened 1,000 times. He has been bitten by a poisonous snake and survived. He has done everything. He has had more reasons than any of us to give up on the change that God had asked him to make in his life. Have you ever felt that way, where you know you need to make change, but you hit so many roadblocks that you finally just give up and stop, right? He more than anybody else, he had good reasons to do that. But while in prison, he writes. He writes to the people of Philippi in the book of Philippians. And he's helping them along. And this book is really cool. Paul talks a lot about his perspective. In fact, we did a series a while back when Pastor Jeff was still here called Perspective over the book of Philippians. And it's his perspective after all that he's been through. And there comes to this point in chapter 4, it's almost to the end of the book of Philippians, and he's still giving his perspective, and he's talking about following God, and he talks about all that he's been through. He talks about how he has learned to be satisfied both when he had a lot and when he had a little. When he was in prison and when he was free, he had learned to be satisfied with all of that. He had learned to endure anything that was sent his way for the sake of making the changes and doing the things that God wanted him to do. And then he says, this right here is why. Listen to this. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I've been through the good and the bad. I've been on the top, I've been on the bottom. I have endured more than you can even imagine. But at the same time, I have been privileged by God to see things that you can never understand. And here's the thing about all that. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. No matter the change, no matter the need, no matter what, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's a statement of endurance. That's a statement of faith. That's a statement of confidence. Not of pride, not of cockiness. I had a man once tell me the difference between cockiness and confidence. Cockiness, you can't back up. Confidence, you can back up. Paul could back up what he was saying. He was confident in his words. I can do all things, no matter what is thrown my way, no matter what I have to overcome, no matter what I am challenged with, no matter the change, no matter the situation, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Say it with me. Say it with me. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Now I want you to say it one more time and say it like you mean it. I can do all things through Christ strengthens me. You said it. Can't take it back now. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Don't want to give it back. Good. All things. That's what this is about. You're probably wondering why I've got this motorcycle on stage. Paul Dedinger is the owner of this beautiful machine, by the way, shined up and pretty up here on stage. He graciously let us borrow this weekend. I haven't touched it since we put it on stage because I'm afraid, because the last time I touched a standstill motorcycle, it fell. So it wasn't his, it was my friend Miguel's, and he never forgave me for it. So I'm not going to touch it because it's too pretty, and I seem to ruin pretty things. Whew. Are we on? For those of you watching the video, the whole crowd was a bunch of smart alecks a while ago. And I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. All right. Say it like I mean it. We're going to edit that part out. We're just going to fade out, fade back in. Take 2, scene 2. All right. And action. Anyway, Paul bought this bike off of not just at a dealership, but off of a guy who was a dealer, which means that it was like the best bike. I mean, the guy sells them for a living, so he's going to have one of the best bikes out there. And just to make sure I get my information right, it's a 2013 Harley Davidson Ultra Classic FL HTK. This thing's got more than 1,600 cc's. I mean, this is a bike. Okay? Those things you see out there, those scooters and those bicycles, that's not a bike. This is a bike. This dude is beautiful. I would love to have one of these one day. I don't think Shanda would ever let me on it, but at least it would look pretty sitting in my front yard, right? Yeah, you have one, or you want one? You have one? It's beautiful. I'll just go out and just sit on it and take pictures, and then I'll Photoshop a road in the background. But then this is a beautiful machine from top to bottom, and it's Paul. I'll brag on Paul for a minute. Paul is a guy who takes care of his stuff. Okay, Paul takes care of his stuff. Look at that. Elaine was just talking. Your truck out there is so shiny. I mean, look at his truck when you go outside. It's beautiful. Paul takes care of his stuff. So that means that from top to bottom, this thing is in good, immaculate shape. I'm looking at it. It's beautiful. But here's the thing about this. Something you might notice. Maybe you can't notice because it's a little hard to see, but I want you to take a look at this tire up here. Okay? And it might look pretty normal. It's a motorcycle tire. Tires on motorcycles and bikes, they have a lot of pressure under them. It's hard for them to really look flat, but I want you to look at that tire. Then I want you to look at this one back here. See if you can kind of tell the difference. I would push on it to show you, but I'm afraid it would fall, so I'm not going to. But the reality is, even though it's a little hidden, you really can't tell, there's actually a flat tire. If you were to try to go forward on this bike, you couldn't get anywhere. Because I think Paul said there should be about 35 pounds of pressure in these tires, and this tire right here is running at about 20 pounds. You couldn't go anywhere on that. You could get no balance. You would ruin the tire. You could ruin the rim. You could ruin the front end riding a bike with that kind of pressure. But the funny thing is, it's kind of hidden, so you might not know. But the reality is that the flat tire is there. You could take this bike into a dealership, and Paul could take it back to the guy he got it from. He could say, when I get on it, it wobbles. And my front end seems kind of out of line, and I'm not sure what's going on. But you know what I think might help? I think I need some new headlights. And that dealer's going to say, I will sell you headlights if you want headlights, but you really ought to fix that flat tire. Yeah, maybe. But you know what might help better? When I ride for too long, especially since it's wobbly, my rear end gets a little numb. I was thinking maybe I could put a better seat on it. Well, you can ride on clouds, but if you don't replace that tire, the bike's not going to go anywhere. Yeah, I know, but what might even things out is if I could go faster. So maybe we can do some engine upgrades so I can get down the road quicker. Because if I'm going fast enough, maybe it'll even itself out. Okay, I can give you the top of the line motor out there. I can give you the very best parts. You can spend another $30,000. I don't think he spent $30,000 originally, but he could spend $30,000 more dollars on this bike. But if you don't fix that flat tire, it's going nowhere. Well, what flat tire? It doesn't look flat to me. But it's still there. Try to get on it and go down the road. Even hidden, even when you can't tell, a reality is the flat tire makes the vehicle useless. It becomes a pile of metal, a really pretty pile of metal, but nothing but a pile of metal. Why? Because of that flat tire. Let me ask you this. What's your flat tire? What in your life is keeping you from fulfilling the potential that God has given you? What in your life is keeping you from getting down the road to the place that God wants you to go? Maybe your flat tire is like mine, and your flat tire is actually the spare tire. Okay? And you struggle with eating and with your weight, with an addiction. Maybe it's your finances. Maybe it's your home life. Maybe it's those little changes that you want to make. And you know what's so funny about a flat tire is it might be just a little low, and you don't think much of it. and then it gets a little lower, and you don't think much of it. And then you're going down the highway, and it blows out, and it's all you can think about, isn't it? Because when it was just a little low, when it was just a little bit, well, it'll still go. It's a little sideways, but it'll still go. And eventually, just like this bike, it becomes useless. And we pretty it up. Well, if I just get nicer clothes, if I just get a better paying job, if I just buy better toys, if I just have a bigger house, if I just look better to them, if I paint myself up nice and pretty, if I put on this mask, or as the Greek word says, if I become a hypocrite, then I can cover up the flat tire. Here's the thing. You ride a flat tire long enough, eventually you're going to throw sparks. When you start throwing sparks, everybody's going to see, because you're going to start setting fires, and you're going to create an awful lot of damage. So let me ask you, what today is your flat tire? What in your life is God wanting you to change? That's what this series is about, if you haven't caught on by the catchy title of the sermon series. It's about change. Not just any change. It's kind of almost playing off what we talked about in that first week as we talked about with the New Year's Revolution. And you might notice back here that our Revolution sign's still up. And it's going to stay up for a while, because that's our theme for the year, is creating a revolution in our lives, in our families, and in our community. That wasn't a one-day thing. That's who we are going to become. Okay? Creating a revolution in ourselves, in our families, and in the lost people of the Theodosia community. And so kind of going off of that, and as we talked about, throwing out all those things that we said we would do, throwing out the resolutions and throwing out all the stuff that we wanted, and saying, God, what do you want? Okay, so now here's this time to take that a next step further. God has said, this is what I want from you. These are the changes I need you to make. Here's the flat tire. Here's the kit to fix the tire. Or if you need it, I have a brand new tire waiting for you. But you have to put it on. What's your flat tire? What does God want you to change? What does He want to do in your life? No matter what you do, no matter how hard you try to hide it, eventually the flat tire is going to come out. I'm going to get my stand here just a second. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about the changes that God wants to make in our lives. And we're going to challenge very deeply. And as I've always said, I would never challenge you with something that I'm not willing to take on myself. But we're going to make major challenges for change. And we're not going to just sugarcoat it, and we're not going to just generalize it. We're going to get down and dirty and specific on some subjects. Some things that we don't want to talk about. Okay? Some things that are easier to talk about, but some things that honestly... there's at least one subject that I'm not going to give away yet that churches, we don't like to hear about it. We don't like to talk about it. We like to pretend like it's not an issue in our lives. We sure the heck don't want some guy on stage telling me what to do with it. But we're going to talk about it because there's biblical aspects on those things. And we're going to talk about the things that God has given us that can make the changes. How to apply the changes in our lives, how to take what He's doing and actually run with it, and how to share the change with others. But we have to start right here. We have to start with ourselves. We have to start with us. See, before Paul became the Apostle Paul, before he became the church planter Paul, before he became the guy who wrote the biggest part of the New Testament that we call the Holy Scriptures of God, before he became that Paul, that road to Damascus had to happen. That change had to happen. The blinding light, the resolution, the revolution, the decision to say, I can no longer go that way because God wants me to go this way. It had to happen. See, Paul could have been blinded. He could have heard the voice and said, yeah, right. Whatever. This isn't Jesus. I still don't believe. And he could have just lived the rest of his life out as a blind, miserable old man. Died, and we never would have heard of him. But instead he said, you're right. I have a flat tire. And my flat tire is sending me into the ditch. And I need a change. I need to make change in my life. I need to do something different. When that kid was born, as I told you, it changed everything for me. Honestly, there's a fire burning in my heart like I haven't had in a long time. I would argue bigger than anything I've ever had in my life to make changes. The last time I felt this motivated to change myself was about 6 months into my marriage, when I realized that my anger issues, my controlling issues, and my type A personality was going to end my marriage in divorce before we hit year 5. And I said, change has to happen. I can't be this way to my wife because she's too precious of a gift for me to let this happen. That's the last time I felt this way. And the fire that's in my heart, why? Because there's something there, and I see that flat tire. And here's the thing. Most of us aren't riding a motorcycle, okay? Because a motorcycle really only fits one person, maybe 2 people. The most of us, we're driving a bus. And we have a bus load of people depending on how we drive. And when there's a flat tire on that bus, if you go into the ditch, you're not the only one who's going to get hurt. All the people on that bus are going to get hurt. Be honest with you, me personally, this bus, I've got to drive this bus. God sets out the map, but it's my job as pastor to drive it. And if I have a flat tire, if I'm not where I need to be, if my cup isn't full, if I'm not at 100% going the direction God wants me to be, I'm going to drive this bus into the ditch. When Pastor Jeff first handed me a key to this church as a youth pastor to do a youth event, he threw the key at me and said, here's the key to the car, don't wreck it. And then when he resigned, he threw every key he had, and he said, here's all of them, don't wreck it. So much truth there. God's given you this key to the motorcycle, to the car, to the bus, the SUV, the boat, whatever it is you have to have, the haul, the people who are depending on you, the people you are responsible for, the things in your life you have to do, however big it might be. God's handed you that key, and He said, I'm expecting you to take care of this, and I'm expecting you to return it with a full tank of gas, 4 new tires, and in the same condition I gave it to you. Because you're a steward of what I've given you. Your body, your mind, your job, your career, your family, everything you have, you're a steward, which means that it's mine, and I'm letting you borrow it. And I'm letting you take care of it because I trust you. And when I say, hey, that tire is low, you better go change it. You better be willing to make the changes. So my prayer today is that we are willing to make those changes in our life. I'm going to be making them right alongside of you. And I have seen in 2013 there was so much change in this room. The people that were baptized, people who gave their life to Christ. 2014, not 2013, excuse me. 2013's had a lot of cool stuff too, but 2014 was pretty stinking awesome. The people who joined our church, the people who rededicated themselves, who gave over their lives, their family, their finances to God. I'm going to brag on one couple named Tim and Kathy Flynn. And I didn't tell them I'm going to do this, and they can be mad at me if they want, but I'm bragging on them. I got the chance to do their vow renewal this last Wednesday alongside of Jeff Alcorn. This time last year, there was talks of divorce papers being filed. They celebrated their 19th anniversary at different places, talking about never being together again, if I'm not mistaken. 1 year later, on their 20th anniversary, they rededicate their lives, their family, and their marriage to God. That's change. And then they say, you know what? We finally got 4 new tires on this car, and we're going down the road again. But, I think we need a safety inspection. So for their new honeymoon, they went to the Art of Marriage, and they said, we're not stopping here. We're going to continue to get better because we don't want to go flat again. See, to be honest, and I can say this without offending Tim and Kathy, this wasn't just a flat tire. This was 4 flat tires and a blown engine laying in the ditch. This was something that most people would have scrapped and given up on. And they thought about doing that. Cutting the losses, taking what they could, and moving on. And at some point, God pushed Himself into Tim's life and said, And then He pushed Himself into Kathy's life and said, no way. Yeah, you put it in the ditch, but here's the financing. Go fix it. Go fix it. Make the changes. Do the things you need to do. And a year later, to rededicate their lives to God, to rededicate their marriage to God, to pray for another 20 years, to be starting ministry together, doing technology ministries, worship ministry. Tim is exploring the roles of future in preaching, and they're on fire for God. And that is true change. That's what we want to see. And maybe you say, well, my problems aren't that big. Well, yeah, they're not that big right now. But do you really want to wait until you're in the ditch with a blown engine? I'd rather maintenance right now. I just had 2 cars blow an engine on me in the last 6 months. And I'm tired of it. And I'm talking real cars, okay? I'm tired of it. Change's got to happen. I hope you're ready to make the change. But there's some things that have to happen for this change to be made. And here's where kind of the core of this message is. We're going to look in the book of Luke at chapter 15. And I'm going to try to move through this relatively quick and finish up here. But we're going to look at the book of Luke in chapter 15. And we're going to start at verse 14. And some of you might know this as the story of the prodigal son. Okay, and we're going to read through this just real quick. And here's what it says. Verse 11. It says this. It says, then he said, and that's Jesus saying that here, by the way. Jesus said, a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided to them his livelihood. Basically, his youngest son said, I don't want to wait until you die. I want my inheritance now so I can go do with it what I want. And the dad said, fine, whatever, and gave it to him. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. That word prodigal there, we think of it as to come home, because we think the prodigal son, he came home. Well, the word prodigal actually means wasteful. It means destructive. It means flat tire living. It means making it look all pretty, but wobbling into the ditch living, okay? That's what prodigal means. It's wasteful living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in the land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed the swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. Think about that right there. This is a guy who's Jewish, okay? His religion, he was Jewish, which meant that they didn't eat pork. They don't eat pork if they're traditional Jewish. And to say that he was so hungry, he wasn't just willing to eat a pig, he was willing to eat the food that a pig eats. Now, we eat ham in our culture, but I wouldn't eat the slop I throw in that bucket. Would you? I used to work at KFC, and our boss had a hog he would fatten every year. And we would, any extra food, anything that was too old to serve to humans, anything that was nasty, anything that fell on the floor, we would put it in a bucket in the back of the back by the back exit, and he would come once a day and pick it up and take it home and feed it to his pigs. KFC. Think about KFC. I love KFC, but the food's kind of greasy and nasty, okay? And you think about food that's not good enough to be served on the counter at KFC. Okay, and I'll eat it tomorrow, but it's still nasty food. The food that's not good enough to be served on the counter at KFC is being fed to the pigs. That's what this guy's eating. Okay? The leftovers, the slop, the stuff that went rotten. And he says, I'm so hungry, I'd be willing to eat what that pig eats. That's hungry. I've never been that hungry in my life. I've been hungry enough to eat McDonald's more than once in a day, but I've never been hungry enough. It's almost the same. Oh man, I'm going to get sued by like every major company if they hear this video. I don't have anything, so take your best shot. So verse 17, listen to verse 17. I want you to remember this because we're going to come back to it in a minute. But when he came to himself, he said, he came to himself, remember that phrase, when he came to himself, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will rise, and I will go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of the hired servants. And he arose, and he came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him, and had compassion, and ran, and fell on his neck, and kissed him. At verse 21... here's another spot we're going to come back to, so mark this. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and no longer worthy to be called your son. 22. But the father said to the servants, bring out the best robe, put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf here to kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this is my son, who was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. Really quick. That last part there. He was dead. He was lost. He's found. Listen, if you're far away from God right now, He is waiting for you. He is literally sitting on His front porch looking for you to take off down the drive. And when He sees you, He will run to you. He will pick you up. He will restore you. The dad gave the fattened calf. He put rings on his fingers and clothes on his back. He will restore you no matter what you've done, no matter how flat the tire, no matter how dead the engine, He will be there. Okay? That's not even what I was originally going to say, but I wanted to share that really quick. But from this story, from the story of the prodigal son, I want us to pull out 3 things that has to happen for change in our lives to truly happen. The first thing is this. We have to see it as necessary. If you're following along in your worship guides, you'll see that there. We have to see the change as necessary. We no longer are going to pretty it up. We no longer are going to try to make it look good. Try to invest money into something that's falling apart when we're putting the money in the wrong places. We're going to start seeing that there's a change that has to be made. We see it as necessary. I told you that first verse I wanted you to remember because we're going to go back to it. I want to read it really quick in Luke chapter 15, verse 17 out of the New International Version because of the way it says it here. In the New King James, which is what I just read, it said, when He came to Himself. But I feel like this phrase right here explains it all. The prodigal son, he's down and dirty. He's throwing slop in the bucket. I mean, I can just imagine he reaches down and takes a handful of slop, and the guy he's working for slaps it out of his hand because he's not good enough to eat with the pigs. And he's laying there looking at the slop in the bucket. And he says, Jesus says that this happens. It says, when he came to his senses. You seen those V8 commercials? Pop! And you see a lot of radicals. Demon be gone. No demons. I'm just going to pop you because you need to be popped. Because you need to come to your senses. Right? When the prodigal son came to his senses, he said this, how many of my father's hired men have food to spare? That guy that I left, that guy that I took his money and I left, that guy who cared for me, who loved me, you know what? He has servants, he has slaves who eat better than I do, who live better than I do. How many of my father's hired men have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. He came to his senses. What am I doing? What am I doing? I have went and I have spent every dollar I have. I am in the slums. I am homeless. I am feeding pigs for a living, which is not a job we even want today. Oh my gosh. You know what? My father, he might accept me as a slave. I'll have to get up. I'll have to clean myself up. I'll have to go back to him. I'll have to promise that I'll make the changes I need to make. I'll fix the things I need to fix. I'll pay him back. I'll be his servant, and I will pay him back every penny that I have stole from him. And I will make these changes because they are necessary changes in my life. We have to stop hiding behind things. We have to stop letting ourselves get lower and lower. Stop denying what needs to happen in our life and say the change is necessary. I really don't want to be on the side of the road with a tow truck telling me the change is necessary, right? It's time to make the change. The change we have to accept completely. Not just, I know that I have a problem, but that's just who I am, right? That's just who I've always been. That's how my dad was. That's how my mom was. That's how my family is. That's just how we do it around here. That's just what it's like. Hey, what are you going to do? No. This is necessary. Why? Because this isn't about how I was raised. This isn't about how we do it in Ozark County. This is about how God does it. And I'm a follower of Christ. and I committed my life to Christ, which means that I'm willing to take the steps. Whether I fail and I have to get back up and try again or not, I'm willing to take the steps that are necessary to make the changes in my life. But I have to accept that the changes are necessary. The second thing that we have to do is this: take responsibility. Listen to the prodigal son here. He's seen that his life is destroyed. He's decided that he's going to go back to his dad. And when he gets to his dad, he says this: "And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son." Now, here's the funny thing about that. If you read up a little, back up to the top, it talks about he went into the city. He surrounded himself by people who liked him for his money. And it was all gone. And when the money was gone, the people were gone. The big city was gone. The glamour was gone. And he could have said, well, it's not my fault. They manipulated me into giving them my money. They stole that money. He convinced me it was a good investment, and I made the investment. And it's his fault that I'm where I'm at. Well, the guy who hired me, he didn't even give me a place to live, so it's his fault that I have to eat with the pigs. It's not my fault. It's their fault. See, when it comes to flat tires, there's three different circumstances. There's three different things. It's either it was already flat, someone else flattened it, or we're a victim of a circumstance, right? I have a story with that really quick. My first vehicle was a 1986 Ford Bronco. I bought it, original price $500. Woman was moving to Alaska, dropped it to $300. The day she was signing the title over to me, she had a flat tire. That's not even the part of the story I was getting at. Flat tire up like an hour away from home. She just got back from a going away party, didn't know how to change a tire. So I went and found her, changed her tire. Well, she might know how to change a tire, but she was in high heels and stuff. So I went and changed her tire. My sister drove me up there because I didn't have a car, obviously. Changed her tire and got her home. She was so happy, she took the price from $500 to $300 to $100. So I bought an 86 Ford Bronco for $100. And I love this thing. But there was one problem with this 86 Bronco. The cup holders in the Bronco were literally almost non-existent. They were about that deep. Okay, not made for not even a cup in 1986 would have fit in a cup holder that deep. At some point later, I actually took McDonald's cups and I cut the bottom off and I screwed them into the cup holder so they would actually fit. I mean, it was awesome. But at this point, I hadn't done that. And Shanda and I had just went and got large drinks and some food from McDonald's. And we were living in Ava, and it was summertime. I took a turn. I turned in to the park in Ava. And when I took that turn, I hit a speed bump, and my drink poured into my lap. Just poured into my lap. And I did this. Whew, oh my gosh. And I went over the top of a barrier. Boom. This one of those big, parking spot barriers that they had to keep cars out of the walking path. And there's my Bronco right on the walking path. And I, boom. Oh, everything okay? Yeah. Back up. Boom. Go up the park. And then I start the park and wobbling. I get out and my tire's flat. So I call my dad because I didn't even have a jack in this old $100 Bronco. And I call my dad, and my dad comes to help me fix the tire. And he's, son, what are you doing? You should have been paying more attention. And you know what I said? It's not my fault. That stupid cup holder. It spilled in that cup holder can't hold. You know what? You're going to blah, blah. That is not my... Yes, it is your fault. Why? Because I'm responsible for the Bronco. And I'm the one who spent $100 on a truck that didn't have cup holders and then tried to make a drink fit. It's not McDonald's fault. In this day and age, I probably could have tried to sue them and I might have won. I need you to replace a $100 tire, and I need $1.5 million in mental damage. Because I was so cold from the waist down, it's not even funny. You put way too much ice in that Powerade. It's your fault. No, it's my fault. And I had to fix the tire. And I had to align the front end. And I had to get it back on the road. Why? Because I have to take responsibility for what's mine. That's my fault. Yeah, the drink spilled in my lap. And I couldn't stop the drink spilling from my lap. But you know what I did have control of? The turn that I made. So it's my bad. Well, but Shanda, she was too pretty and I was distracted. No. It's my fault. Take responsibility. See, the prodigal son took responsibility for his actions. He didn't blame it on anyone else. He went to his dad and he said, I have sinned. You didn't sin. Because he could have blamed it on his dad. Dad, this is your fault. I'm just a kid. Why did you give me that much money? You knew I couldn't handle it. You're supposed to be the mature one. You're supposed to be raising me. This is your fault. I couldn't handle that kind of responsibility. Why did you give it to me? This isn't my fault. This is your fault. In fact, I should get half of my brother's inheritance too. Because it's your fault I'm broke. No. He said, I have sinned. I take responsibility for what I've done. And if you'll just give me one more shot, I'll try to make it up to you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son, but I'll be called your servant, and I will take responsibility. Listen, we like to blame God for our problems. We like to blame God for things that we think, well, God is in control, right? And all things are supposed to happen for a reason. I've told you this before, and I'll tell you it again. You figure out where it says in the Bible all things happen for a reason, and I'll believe you. But until you can find that, I'm not going to believe you. Okay? God gave us free will, and it is not God's fault that someone else did something evil to you. And it's also not God's fault that you chose to react in a bad way. It's your fault. It's your consequences. It's your responsibility. You asked for it. You wanted freedom. You wanted money. You wanted a job. You wanted a house. You wanted a family. This is your responsibility. God will be there to help you. He will be there to guide you, to strengthen you, and to give you the ability to fix the flat tire. But it's not His fault. It's time for us to take responsibility of our own actions. And the third thing is this. Live obediently. Got a real good example of living obediently right here on this stage, and here's why. If you haven't noticed, it's been perfect motorcycle weather the last couple of days. And I went to Paul a couple of weeks ago, and I said, Paul, when I start this change series, I would love to put your bike on the stage and flatten the tire. And instead of looking at me like, are you crazy? He said, yeah, let's do it. And then whenever the 55-degree weather hit, he was like, all right, we'll still do it. And, maybe had a few arguments with God, but he gave in and he was obedient to God. I'm going to keep this commitment. I'm going to do it. That's a pretty heavy act of obedience right there, because I probably would have been tempted to make up some excuses to be out on that road. Hey, we'll help you out the door if you want to go this afternoon, okay? That's obedience. But we have to live obediently. Looking back at one more time at the thing about with cars, okay? You can choose to let everything start to fall apart, or you can do what? You can maintenance it along the way. Take it into your mechanic. Hey, you need new spark plug wires. Hey, you need more antifreeze. Hey, it's time for an oil change. Hey, those tires on the back are getting bald. You should probably replace them. Yeah, you know what? You're probably right, and I probably should. But I'm going to try to get them down the road a little bit further. No, I'm going to change them. I'm going to maintenance. I'm going to be obedient. I'm going to be a good steward. I'm going to take care of what I have from this point forward. Now that I've fixed the problems, now that I've fixed the changes, I'm going to be obedient to God and move forward. The prodigal son, out of all of his disobedience, out of all the things he did, he finally said, I'm going to come back. And he said, I will become one of my father's slaves. One of my father's servants. I will become indebted to him. The Bible says this, when we give our life to Christ, we are no longer a slave to sin, but it does say we become a slave to Christ. Not that, he's a wrathful God who makes us do stuff, but no, this is the man who saved my life, and I owe him a debt, and I will spend my days being obedient to him and doing what he wants from me in spreading the love of Jesus. So we can't just make the changes. We can't just get things in place, but we have to choose from this day forward to create obedience. And here's the thing, that last point right there, that obedience to God, please hold on to that. If you give that up when you walk out these doors, you're not going to like what I have to say over the next couple of weeks. But if you choose to approach this series and what we're going to do with some fun, with some humor, and with some seriousness about what God wants, and with obedience, God will make changes in your life for the good. Let's pray. Gracious Father, I am so happy that you let us worship today, that you gave us a chance to learn from you, Father. God, I pray for everyone in this room and for the changes that they want to make and for the things they want to do, Father. And as we listen to this song about change and about